My annual visit to my grandparents in Colorado was like a trek to a foreign land. It was my mother's job to take me. My father stayed home, using his precious vacation time to hunt. My father had been working as a chemist for the CB&Q Railroad in Galesburg when little Peggy died. And when my parents fled Illinois the day following Peggy's funeral, as if fleeing the plague, I traveled with them to Lompoc, California, where my father found work as a laborer at the Sea Light Products Company. All day he pushed a hand truck carrying 4 80-pound sacks of Sea Light, from the packers to the stackers in the warehouse. At night he ached so badly he could scarcely undress. My father had always been a working man, spawned from the most humble beginnings, and he never forgot where he came from. Although he was a chemist by education, at heart his allegiance was with the men who labored in the plants and the mills and the mines. He was a Democrat and a Union man. He loved Franklin D. Roosevelt and disdained Hoover. He respected those who earned an honest living by hard work, was unafraid of work himself, and would not tolerate the mistreatment of any person. He believed that those who exercised power over others were suspect, for most often power in the hands of the powerful is exercised wrongfully. His true friends were the working men. He understood them. They talked his language. He trusted them and respected them and fought for them, and was proud that the workers were his friends. After 3 or 4 months, I traveled with my parents back to Wyoming, where my father took the chemist's job at the tie-treating plant at Sheridan, again for the CB&Q. Traveling on the train with my mother to my grandparents was a powerful primary experience for me. And the magic that took us there from Sheridan each summer was the free railroad pass, one of the few comps provided by the railroad for the families of its employees. The free pass, of course, was not good for anything but the chair car. Rich people rode in the Pullman. In some of the chair cars, the men's bathroom, which was at one end of the car, was inside the smoking room. And if you had to go, you had to brave it through the smoke. "You hold your breath, Jerry, when you walk through that room," my mother admonished. "And don't talk to the men in there. If men will desecrate their bodies, which are the Lord's temples, with tobacco smoke, and if they'll become addicted to such a horrid habit, and do so voluntarily, and against God's will, they're not the kind of men a boy should know or talk to." She'd warned me before about such noxious places. When in the summer I walked in downtown Sheridan and had to pass the Main Street bars, their doors flung open against the heat, she would warn me in the same fashion. "When you walk by those bars, Jerry, you hold your breath. You shouldn't let the smell of alcohol enter your body. You wouldn't let such smells into church, and you shouldn't let such smells into your body." After 9 o'clock, the conductor turned off the lights. I remember the sound of the steel wheels on the rails, the hypnotic clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. On into the night, the sound of the train's long whistle far ahead, the insistent ding-ding-ding of crossing bells, the old chair car at full speed swaying back and forth like a boat over heavy waves. I hear and feel those sounds and motions today, and should I ever be awarded a ticket to heaven, I hope it would be on a train speeding through the night, and I would listen to that clickety-clack and sway into the edge of eternal sleep on the old CB&Q. We changed trains at Alliance, Nebraska, and again at Denver. Our luggage was one huge, cheap, black metal suitcase and another black leather bag about the size of a 100-pound bag of flour. I would grapple with the latter, while my mother lifted the metal suitcase, staggered and struggled with it a few feet at a time, sat it down, caught her breath, and started all over again. Denver was the largest city in the world so far as I knew. It even had a Woolworth store with an escalator. We had a long layover in Denver, about 5 or 6 hours. We checked the big metal suitcase in at the depot check stand, 10 cents, but we carried the handbag to save the extra dime. At Woolworth's, I walked along the open counters. I gawked at the bags of beautiful glass marbles, and I stared at the cheap, black-painted tin revolver that clicked inside. Click, 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 you're dead when you pull the trigger. I saved my allowance, 10 cents a week, as long as I did the dishes once a day. I bought a bag of marbles for a dime and the clicker gun and the holster for 30 cents. Then suddenly it was time to go. The fairy tale was ending, the magic trance in its last afterglow, And then my mother said those words that will ring in my ears until I die. Whatever will we do if we miss the train? It was the most dreadful of all possibilities. Her face was grim, her eyes consumed with fear. We ran as fast as we could. Whatever will we do? We would probably die in the streets, I thought. We would be captured by the gypsies and become their slaves. To this day, my mother's transferred fear plunges me into the most unrelenting anxiety whenever I am about to catch a plane. Whatever will I do if I miss the plane? As the years pass, we take on the outward appearances of adults, but it is only a large, noisy, hairy-chested facade that obscures the child within. Like the tree, we have grown from the inside out. When the train pulled into that desolate place called Lyman, Colorado, Grandpa and Grandma Flieger were there to meet us. The town looked as if the people had long ago abandoned it. Newspapers blew up against the sides of the buildings, and empty cans rolled in the wind down Main Street. The wind in Lyman, Colorado never stopped, and the dryland farmers, deep into the Depression, struggled to survive in those desperate Dust Bowl days of the grapes of wrath. Grandpa flung our bags into the trunk of his old black Buick, then drove the wreck back to the farm. Oncoming cars got out of his way. All creatures, man or beast, got out of his way. He was not in awe of preachers. He had no insurance. He had no respect for bankers, and he wasn't afraid of the Depression. He wasn't even afraid of God. He gave 10 cents, no more, to the church on Sunday morning. If that wasn't enough, well, God could go to hell. The Fliegers were strong, square-made people. Grandpa with that broad, powerful chest and strong arms, and a large square head and dark hair, and Grandmother short, with hardly any figure at all, scurrying around the kitchen like a busy, frightened country mouse. She wore a plain cotton dress that tied in the back, and she smiled at me with soft, dark eyes that seemed happy when Grandpa wasn't around. Her once black hair was graying and done up neatly in a bun. She was a gentle-spoken woman with a heavy German accent who never raised her voice and who never, not once, spoke back to my grandfather. Leonard and Barbara Flieger had settled in Minnesota before the turn of the century. There in the year 1901, my mother was born, their second child. In about 1907, Leonard Flieger caught the go west itch. He was going to homestead in Colorado, going to be a big-time farmer, going to own half the county by the time he was ready to retire. He settled in Lyman. On Grandpa's farm, he and his 3 sons had built a large red barn with a few small outbuildings and a sternly upright 2-story white house. Next to the barn, a windmill rattled and banged, complaining against the constant prairie gale. The grass, the little that had not been worn away, was short, brown, dust-covered, and hard. The cottonwood trees that once shaded the farm had long since died, their bark blown off by the wind. One could see nothing but dirt and blowing dust for as far as the eye could focus. I thought of my grandfather Flieger's as a place of death. Nothing wanted to grow there, and all living things soon gave up their lives. The head of the vealed calf, dropped behind the barn where it had been slaughtered, lay, gazing up at the sun, its tongue rotted out, the flies pecking away at its eyes. Even the prairies died and lay down to be covered by the blowing dust. My parents were married in the summer of 1927 at that same Flieger farm. A big affair on the prairies, this dryland farmer's oldest daughter getting married. Grandpa Flieger didn't think Gerald Milner Spence was worthy of his daughter. No man really was, especially this man, who was not a landed man, not a businessman, not a German. My mother wore a white satin dress, one that she and her mother had made. She carried a bouquet of long-stemmed white roses that had been shipped in all the way from Denver. My father, his hair trimmed short and his ears sticking out, wore his navy blue suit. After they were married, they moved to Laramie, Wyoming, where my father took up his duties as assistant state chemist and where I was later born. I was always afraid of Grandpa Flieger. Everybody around him was. He spoke in a loud voice to people, as if they were a couple of blocks away instead of standing next to him, and sometimes he didn't laugh when things were really funny. He had that German sense of humor, or lack of it, my father said. He also thought himself a poet. He made a poem up about me. Gerald Leonard Spence sitting on a fence trying to make $1 out of 15 cents.